Today marks a significant step, I think, in our continuing effort in Massachusetts to increase access to voters and voting. I'm very proud of the record we have. We have over 4 million eligible registered voters. We've seen record turnouts in the last 2 presidential elections. And we continue to expand the opportunities for voters through such efforts as early voting and online registration and pre-registration of 16-year-olds. But clearly, there is always an opportunity for important progress, and I think today marks one of those opportunities. Over the last several months, in fact, beginning back in June, I think my first interaction was with the coalition from Joyce Hackett and I having a conversation at the Democratic State Convention in Worcester, where we talked about the concept of automatic registration, and that's a concept that has been advanced in several other states. It's a very simple concept. The idea is when you have an interaction with a government agency, you would automatically be registered to vote. So, for instance, we have had in Massachusetts, as a result of the motor voter law now for over 20 years, an opportunity to opt in when you have a transaction at the Registry of Motor Vehicles. This would be different in the sense that you would have to opt out. The versions of the bill, though, vary from state to state, and certainly the suggestions that were here were very broad initially as well. Over a period of several months, we have narrowed that to a situation where we now can agree on a piece of legislation where there will be 2 important opportunities for Massachusetts citizens to automatically register. One will be the Registry of Motor Vehicles, which I mentioned already, and the other is Mass Health. And the reason Mass Health is an important opportunity is because of the number of people that it covers, but also the reliability of the data that they would be presenting to us. That is to say, they vet their clients very carefully. Persons who deal with Mass Health obviously have to provide them with a lot of background information. We had to resolve issues relating to whether that information could be transferred from Mass Health to us. I want to thank Joyce Hackett in particular for her diligence in trying to get an opinion on that, and I'm very satisfied with that. Having said that, I'm therefore very happy to endorse the concept of the bill and so the bill itself. I also want to report important progress on the bill. The bill, and reporting under several versions that have been filed, was reported out on the last day of action by the Election Laws Committee, but it had been languishing in the clerk's office. I'm pleased to tell you that it has now been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. It will be referred later today. I intervened on that, and the bill will have a new number, which will be 4320. And so that will be the new bill that we will be seeking to enact. I want to say that it's extremely important that we get this enacted this year because the concept here, and the advocates and I all agree, we're shooting for 2020, to have this in place for 2020, recognizing the significance of that upcoming presidential election. But to do that and make it effective, we really have to have it passed in 2018. The legislative session will end in July. It's important that we reach final passage by that date. That will give us the opportunity to begin working in 2019 to make sure this bill reaps the fruit of the effort, that we get the people who are participating at the Registry of Motor Vehicles and also the people who will be participating through Mass Health to make sure that we get the best benefit out of this new concept. It's certainly not exclusive. There are other ideas out there, such as same-day registration and others, that we'll continue to pursue and are continuing to pursue. But I think this is an important opportunity. I want to compliment the Committee on Election Laws for its diligent effort. Both Senator Goby and Representative Mahoney have worked hard on this. And lastly, I want to make note of the fact that one of the most aggressive sponsors on this, who reached out to me many times and was a sincere advocate for this, was the late Representative Peter Kokott. Peter was a person who I had a history of working with on a whole range of issues, and I respected greatly. I deeply regret he's not with us today. He certainly would be proud of the effort that's been made, and I think see this as an important milestone. I'm going to now introduce Devin Neer, the Assistant Director of Common Cause, who is here on behalf of Pam Wilmot. Pam was ill today and unable to make it, and I'll let Devin take it over from there.
Thank you, Secretary Galvin. As the Secretary mentioned, Pam is out sick today, so I'll be filling in for her. We are absolutely thrilled to have the Secretary's support on this key reform, and we want to thank him for sharing that support this morning. Automatic voter registration would not only make our elections more inclusive, but also enhance the accuracy and security of our voter rolls. 11 other states and Washington, D.C. have adopted this measure, with Washington State joining that list just earlier this week. And AVR is gaining momentum in several other states as well, including Maryland and New Jersey. Now is the time for better, more modern, and more secure elections in Massachusetts with automatic voter registration. We urge the legislature to bring the bill up for a vote as soon as possible with its fancy new number. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to introduce Merrill Kessler, who's the Executive Director of the Mass League of Women Voters. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Merrill Kessler. I'm Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and I'm really delighted to be here today representing the State League, our 46 local leagues around the state, and our thousands of members and supporters, and I'm especially delighted to be here for this announcement this morning. So thank you, Secretary. For over 98 years, the League of Women Voters has fought to empower voters and defend democracy. We believe that democracy works best when it works for everyone, and that's why we're supporting bringing AVR to Massachusetts. As Devin said, AVR will expand access to the ballot by removing unnecessary obstacles to registration, and at the same time, it will make registration more accurate, more secure, and more inclusive. Oregon's successful rollout of AVR in 2016 showed us how this common sense reform can empower voters and make democracy work. And 10 other states, as Devin mentioned, most recently Washington, just last week, have followed in Oregon's path. So now really is the time to bring AVR to Massachusetts, and we thank the Secretary for joining us and our coalition partners in this effort, and we look forward to working together to get this over the finish line this session. Thank you.
And lastly, but certainly not least, not last actually, now that I remember my order here, but Janet Dominites from the Executive Director of Mass PIRG is here to speak actually on behalf of Mass Vote because Cheryl Crawford could not be with us today.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Janet Dominites. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group. And I have to say I did a double take because I consider this a sign, although I'm not a suspicious person. This is my extension at my office. So I am.
Know that.
I know, and I think this is good luck. So I'm very happy about that beautiful sign. Three quick things. First of all, I want to join the other members of the Election Modernization Coalition. And we'll first of all point them out. We have Gavi Wolf from the ACLU of Massachusetts, Beth Wong from the Massachusetts Voter Table, and as the Secretary said, Cheryl Crawford, who's the Director of Mass Vote, unfortunately is also ill. We're really a healthy bunch. It just happens to be today in particular. But three quick things. One, I want to join the others in saying a sincere thanks to Secretary Galvin. This is we've been working for years together, and we are so grateful to have his support today and to host this event here. So thank you so much. That's number one. Number two, MassPIRG has members in every single one of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, but we started as a student organization, and we have chapters on college campuses around the state. And just to put a finer point on how this is going to open up democracy, there have been so many studies that show that if we get young people to register when they are 18, they stay voters. And for us in particular, removing this barrier and making the registration of voting easier through automatic voter registration, we feel certain is going to bring young people into our franchise, and we really think that that bodes well for the future. And third, again, to emphasize what other people have said, we may have been faked out by the storm predictions today, but the storm of support for automatic voter registration is real. We had, on another snowy day in January, we had over 100 people here in the State House for a lobby day, and the heads of over 30 organizations ranging from veterans groups to teachers groups to religious groups. I mean, this is a storm of support that has been building and growing and transcends the seasons, and we really hope the legislature will take this now and make it law. So again, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for this event this morning.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce Joyce Hackett, who has been an activist on this. As I said, she was the original person that reached out to me, and we've had many conversations, and she's fulfilled all the requests I've made of her. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Joyce Hackett. I'm here on behalf of the activists of Massachusetts, including Indivisible Massachusetts, People Power, Rise Up, Action Together, and Lift Every Vote. That's an organization. We're just a bunch of volunteer activists working to pass automatic voter registration. We and the social justice committees of synagogues, churches all over the state, and a whole bunch of new activists are just very inspired to pass this bill because it enables us to reach out to the 15% of Massachusetts that's eligible but unregistered and pull them in and say, you know, you matter and your voice matters and we want to pull you into the process. So we're just thrilled to have Secretary Galvin's support. He's been really working behind the scenes with us to craft a bill that is that works for everyone, and we just are really hoping that we can move this bill and get it passed this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joyce. If you have any questions, I'm assuming everyone else will answer questions. If you have any, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and I'm sure they will too.
Are any of you aware of other states that have passed ADR that includes the provision around with Medicaid automatic?
Mass Health. Well, Joyce, you might be the best person to speak to that.
Kentucky uses several social service agencies to register people, and New York City registers people through 25 agencies. But Massachusetts would be the first to do that, and so we're thrilled about that.
Sure, it's not Medicaid, it's Mass Health. But just on the point, and maybe Joyce can stay just for a second, the concern I had, which was not necessarily a personal concern, but an administrative concern, that because we had reached out to Mass Health, was whether the HIPAA regulations would prohibit them from sharing information. Joyce worked very diligently and got a very thorough opinion from the Brennan Center, which verified that it would not. I mean, our concern wasn't the cooperation with the agency, it was whether they, in fact, could cooperate with us. The idea would be the only information they would be giving us would be the name, the date of birth, the address of the client. They wouldn't be providing us with any medical information, which they would not be able to do. But that's sufficient for us, just like the registry of motor vehicles. People go to the registry of the motor vehicles to register their automobile, get their license. Here, we're talking about simply them taking the advantage of the fact they're participating in this statewide health program, and then we automatically register them to vote. And if they wish to decline, then they can decline.
Does this help people get off the road? Does this help if people were to pass away, so you can update your registry?
Well, it helps many ways. We monitor on deaths, so just so you know. Deaths are monitored a couple of ways. First of all, if there's a death certificate generated in the community, it goes automatically to the election officer in that community. But because some people, inconveniently die outside of their hometown, we must always purge the list. So we, on a statewide basis, regularly monitor the list for deaths, and we remove them, or we have instruct the local clerks to remove them. So we would get additional information, but we're not looking to this to monitor that. We do that from death certificates that are either generated at the local level or statewide.
What's the cost for this, Mr. Secretary?
Well, that's why it's going to the Ways and Means Committee. I believe the cost will be at the state level will be relatively low. The costs are more likely to be generated at the local level, which will probably require reimbursement to communities, because most likely it's going to be determined to be a mandate. If we are telling, let me just go through how it's going to work. In other words, we're going to get the information, we're going to transmit it to our local election officials. They will automatically propose to enroll the person, but they have to notify the individual so they can decline or pick a party. That will be where the costs will be incurred. And the auditor has rather regularly, most recently with early voting, ruled that whenever there's an election issue which requires a locality to do something that they previously weren't doing before, that's a mandated cost and has to be reimbursed. So presumably there will be one. One of the important things of getting it to Ways and Means, which was it's been sitting in the clerk's office now for several weeks, and we were concerned about the time limit on this session, is Ways and Means will conduct an evaluation which will put most likely what is known as a fiscal note on the bill and determine what the actual cost will be. I would point out to you, though, with the amount of, there's a couple of things, and I make this point often when I have an opportunity to speak both about this and regarding same day. Under federal law, since the 2000 Florida situation, we are required at every polling location that involves a federal election, every election is a federal election because we have congressional races on there, to offer voters who show up, or persons who show up, a provisional ballot. And those provisional ballots, which are very good, but are intended to protect the right of the voter while their status can be determined. Unfortunately, most often, we determine that they're not eligible to be counted because they had not registered. So particularly during, for instance, a presidential election or any large election, you're going to have a tremendous amount of staff time both at the local level and our level and the registry of motor vehicles as well, because often that's where the issue is presented. Looking through records, with the result at the end of the day, the vote isn't counted. This is going to be a much more efficient use of resources. It's going to lead to a situation where people are presumed to be registered as opposed to see whether they opted in, which is what we've been up against up to now. Mass Health, as you already noted, is a new opportunity, but nevertheless, I think it will still be more efficient because we'll be getting the data from Mass Health, which I think one of the reasons I was comfortable with Mass Health as opposed to, for instance, public libraries or other government agencies, is that Mass Health inherently has to do research on its clients. And its clients have an interest in making sure the information they present is accurate and complete. So it's reliable. And from an administrative point of view, that's extremely important to us that we get reliable information.
If this doesn't pass this session, could it still be in place for 2020?
Well, it could, but I think it would make it more challenging. I mean, just remember this, when speaking of 2020, we will have already had our presidential primary in 2020 by this time 2 years from now, because it'll be the first Tuesday in March. So when you look at it that way, that's now going to be less than 24 months from now, to put in place a new system that picks up hopefully tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people and giving them the opportunity to vote is going to take some administrative time. I mean, one of the practical problems, and my new coalition partners maybe are not always as aware of this as I like to keep reminding them, is that administratively, these concepts are good, but I have to make them work. And I have to work with 351 cities and towns and other agencies. And if I could snap my fingers and make it happen, I would, but I can't. My fingers aren't that good. So the bottom line is I have to work, and we need time. Michelle Tassinari, the election director, is here, and she's the person who actually, makes it happen. And therefore, we have to work with these folks. So we need the time. We want this to be a success. We want the opportunity for these people to vote, particularly as we approach 2020. The coalition recognized the time was necessary. That's why they looked for the 2020 implementation date as opposed to an earlier date. But I think to make this really work, we need it passed in 2018.